You're listening to CINEBINGE.
Welcome to CINEBINGE. This show was born from my friend's persistence in me watching certain shows.
I've been asking Simon to watch Dark, a German TV show on Netflix, which I guarantee he will like. But for some reason, he's always been a little apprehensive about watching it.
So I said, I'll watch it if we can put a podcast around it. And this is that podcast. Welcome to CINEBINGE. My name's Simon.
And my name's Andrew.
And today we are talking about episode 8.
Which is called As You Sow, So Shall You Reap. No, it isn't. It's called As You Sow, So You Shall Reap.
I was going to say, it's a bit of a tongue twister, the title to this one, I think.
It is. Well, it's because I've heard that phrase, variations of it over the years. And so I always get it mixed up as to how they titled it versus how I've heard it previously.
Because I've heard it as what you sow is what you reap.
Yes, exactly. It all means the same thing ultimately, doesn't it?
Huge episode this week. This was the episode where finally the penny from 1986 dropped and made me want to watch the next episode pretty much straight away.
Kind of figured that would happen. This is certainly that episode. And in fact, on rewatching this now, as I'm rewatching it again with you, I immediately did that. I got to the end of this episode and was like, yeah, I know what happens next, but I'm still going to rewatch, and ended up watching to the end of the season yet again.
So we get a few answers in this episode. We get an answer to a question that only happened in the previous episode, and that was where we see a little boy whose face is covered in blood, and he wakes up in the blue room, and now we find out how he actually got that wound. And my theory of saying I don't think that's his blood, I was slightly wrong.
Not for the first time with some of your theories so far.
Yeah. I do have another theory on, well, I have not a theory, but I think I know where this show is going to go.
Okay, well, we'll hold off on exploring that because there's a lot to talk about with this show first.
True.
And so let's not jump straight into Simon's theory just yet.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's as you're right, it's a very interesting episode, really, isn't it? It's it leaves you. I think it leaves you feeling sorry for certain individuals that we were previously probably feeling quite angry about, I guess, based on the previous episodes, and vice versa. We've also seen a character who we kind of had a little bit of sympathy for just do something that was so ultimately horrible and horrific. You kind of go, oh, no, that's just not on. So yeah, let's talk about it. Let's actually talk about what happened in this episode.
It makes me... I'd like to hear an interview with the filmmakers of this because, you know, there is that dinner party question. If you could go back in time and kill Hitler when he was a baby, would you? And that's the vibe I got with this episode, and that's the vibe I'm getting sort of with the whole show now. But going back to the beginning of this episode, we have another Back to the Future reference, and it opens with loads of clocks. There's loads of clocks in the scientist's room, and I thought that was very reminiscent of the opening to Back to the Future with Doc Brown.
He's actually a clockmaker, which makes the existence of all those clocks in his shop actually quite expected, I guess.
Unlike Doc Brown, who's just a bit of a lunatic.
Yeah. But certainly his professional day job is about time.
I think the biggest thing in this episode, I think the biggest change in this episode, change of pace, change of scenery, change of time, was going to 1953. And that was quite exciting because it was quite new, and it was interesting to see this show isn't just going to be jumping from 1986 to 2019. So I thought this is interesting. I did think the whole show was going to be based around 2 decades, but clearly that's not the case.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's based on the conversation that the clockmaker Tannhaus was having with the stranger, when they were talking about how people tend to think of things as in dualities, black and white, up and down, and the reality is there's a third state. So you when you have an up and down, you also have a middle. So that kind of plays out in this episode, because we now discover that there are 3 time periods, not just 1986 and 2017 to think about. Oh, sorry, 2019 rather, I should say.
Is it 2019 that it was set? Because the show came out 2017.
It's set. Yeah, exactly. That's why I got confused. So it's set in 2019. This particular season,
right? Okay,
and then jumps because it's 33 years difference, isn't it, between 86 and 2019?
If you can do maths, it is.
Yeah.
So we see the beginning of the power plant in this episode, and it's all very, there's propaganda how good this is going to be, and which I thought was quite interesting to see how this very open, very countryside looking town has no, the whole show, the whole season, we've seen these beautiful vistas, but they've always been shaded with, you could see the power plant in the background, or you could see something that was like industrial mixed in with this like beautiful scenery, where in 1953 you see, well, obviously the power plant isn't there just yet, so you see it as like a completely different village, and there's a different vibe. But I think
it's like in Back to the Future. It's like in Back to the Future when he goes back in time and the mall is no longer there, and it's just arms and advertising balls telling people what's to come.
Yeah, I didn't expect Ulrich to be going back in time in this show, to be honest with you. So I thought that was interesting. He decided to take Did he go left?
Yes, he basically has taken a different route if he's ended up in 53 instead of 86.
Which makes me think that must be the only time zones you can go to, because there's only left and right in this cave.
Yeah,
door.
so it's essentially what you're seeing in that cave is essentially what Tannhaus is describing, in that there are 3 points and they converge. So you have yes, from one direction you would end up in 86, and the other direction you would end up in 1953. What I found interesting about that conversation in the clockmaker's room, when they were discussing this idea that there is a third way, that there's a center point, and when you consider that in terms of the years that we visited, in my mind, that makes 2019 the future, and 1986 is the actual central point, the now. Mm-hmm. The 53 is the past. 2019 is the future, and 1986 is the now. So although the show started with what was going on in 2019, that conversation makes you kind of think, oh, actually, maybe that's what we were really witnessing there was the future.
Yeah, there was an awful lot of exposition in this episode, an awful lot of explaining, and I don't think it's possible for a TV show or movie to explain time folding without taking a piece of paper and folding it. It happens in like every movie you see that talk about time. It happened in Interstellar. It happened in that. Do you remember that horror sci-fi movie? What was it called? Event Horizon. Have you seen that?
Yes. Yeah.
So they did the whole time folding and that. So, and in Event Horizon, that basically opens up hell, that dimension, by when they fold time. So we have in this isn't just sci-fi. There's other stuff going on here with, like, I think I think in the next season there's going to be a lot more evil and bad stuff going on. That's my prediction, not theory. That's just Simon's prediction. But this episode basically centered around, well, most of the time it was with the scientist and the guy who Is he the stranger? Is that what we call him, the stranger?
He is the stranger, yeah.
Yeah, so there's the stranger, and who I think is not going to be a stranger. I think that's going to be someone who's already... I think that'll be like Jonas or Ulrich or someone. No, not Ulrich, but I think it'll be like Jonas from the future, whatever. That's not my theory, that's just a thought difference. And then... but we centre around this little boy, who we don't really know who he is. He seems a bit weird, like he's got a dead bird at the beginning in his little box, and like, well, we hadn't seen any dead birds for a while, so, but had he killed it, or had he had this fallen from the sky? And he said, it fell from the sky. He said this to... Did he say this to Ulrich? No, he said this to...
Yeah, he said it.
Was it?
He said it to Ulrich. Yeah, he said it to Ulrich.
That's right. And... Which, if that is true, it's not the nuclear plant that's been causing these birds to die, because the nuclear plant... Let me get this straight. It's not been built yet, has it?
No, it's due to be built, but they need planning permission.
Yeah, so the nuclear power plant isn't what was causing the birds to fall out the sky. So that's kind of being cleared up. So we open up the show with this little boy. He goes to this big house... and I'm not sure if it's his mum, but she basically is a bit of a bitch. She's basically not very nice to him. Tells him to strip, which is really, really uncomfortable to watch. Like the way that the camera just stays on her and she folds her arm, and it didn't feel comfortable at all, because you felt sorry for that kid. He's the kid. He's getting he's getting embarrassed, and she was like a bully. And then we have a man who's limping, and is he his father? Do we find that out at this point?
Yeah, so they talk about Bernd Doppler being the kid's father. I think in the police station, it's basically established. It's following on from the previous 1986 episode when we were talking to Bernd Doppler and Helga Doppler. There's clearly some sort of father-son relationship there between those two.
So I didn't like that lady, and there's also there's a weird subplot in this episode where we have a lady who's going to be moving into a house, but she gets invited for dinner there or something. I
think she's renting a room or rooms, and has been invited to dinner. It wasn't intention that they would be, feeding Agnes and her son, but they've been invited to dinner all the same because Doris has become friends with her, I guess, and just wants to be nice.
Now, when they say things all happen, when they say everything repeats itself in this show, certain themes, and the first thing I thought was there might be an affair going on here, because there was some chemistry between the lady who was visiting to stay who was going to stay at the house with, I don't know who it was, but with the with that guy, but then later on, there's some, well, I think lesbian connotations going on, because there's that moment where she brushes a hand, and they have a moment, and you're like, what is going on with this? This is interesting. Not in a bad way.
I think I certainly find it interesting that when you track back that relationship, between, obviously we know that Ulrich was a cheater, and then we also discovered that in 1986 his father was also cheating with Claudia Tiedemann, and then now we've gone back another step and we see that Tronte's mother, Agnes Nilsson, is also potentially likely to be coming on to a married woman. So there's a history there. There's a history. It kind of makes you wonder, is the reason that Ulrich is like he is because he saw his father being that way, and his father saw his mum being that way, and it's just kind of, they just followed the natural kind of, they've just copied what they've seen. They copied the behaviour.
Yeah. We find out the person who opened the show, the whole series, there's that voiceover, and now we know who that is. It's the scientist guy. What's his name?
Tannhaus.
So it's Tannhaus.
Yeah.
And we also see him in 1953, and he gets visited by Ulrich.
Yes.
And Ulrich mistakenly leaves his jacket behind with an with an iPhone in it. Which
another kind of common trope of time travel stories, isn't it? That technology from the future or information from the future is leaked back to the past, and is that likely to now influence and change history?
Yeah. So I thought it was an episode that didn't really. It was like, I'm trying to explain it, where it didn't feel like it progressed the overall story with what's going on. It just felt like it was filling in little parts for you to go. It felt like it was setting up for the next sort of season and next two episodes. It feels like, you know, it still hasn't gone into overdrive yet. It still hasn't like started to race, but it certainly did make me get on board. I'd still get confused about all the different people in this, and you know, even I had the montage and it showed all the different times and how like people were related and stuff. We had that wall, like there was a scene where we had the wall and there's all these pieces of strings connecting everybody, and then there was a lady, don't know who that was.
So this kind of goes back to previous conversations that we've had around how this show moves very quickly, doesn't signpost everything, and it kind of you will pick things up on a rewatch. The worst thing you can do is to kind of go, oh, who's that lady that I saw in this episode, and then Google it, and then you end up in a whole world of spoilers that you didn't want to see. So it pays more to go back and rewatch an episode when you haven't quite got why people are in the scene that they're in. So taking that lady as an example, the shot just before you see her, based on the rest of that kind of montage sequence where it's showing people people at different ages in their life, it would show, for example, Egon Tiedemann as a young man in 1953, and then again in 1986, and then it would show somebody like Regina Tiedemann, and it was showing each of the main characters at different parts of their life. And that old lady shows up on the wall. She shows up as being the elderly version of Claudia Tiedemann, who we've seen in 1986 as the power plant boss, the one who's about to take over from Bernd Doppler, and also as a young girl in 1950 as well, 1953. So we've seen her in her younger form in this episode and in the previous episodes, and we're, I guess, meant to work it out from the shot on the wall. Oh, okay, we can see that's how she would look as an older lady, and in the very next shot you see her standing there. So it's kind of, although it doesn't make it clear that that's who it is, the information is there in the earlier shots. It's just that if you blink and you miss it, you're going to miss perhaps some important information. But at the time they do that, there's not really a huge deal to know, other than, oh, they've introduced another age of a character. It's not a major issue to not know who that is at this point, because it will be filled in later episodes anyway. Well,
I mean, I would say, so the older lady who we see now, so what year was she in? Like, when was she looking at that wall? It's not clear about that.
That's a good. Yeah, that is a very good question. I mean, on that subject as well, the whole what year is this? We can probably ask that of what year is the stranger talking to the clockmaker in?
Yeah.
What year is... We had the same kind of conversations, I think, for the last episode when we saw Helga, 1986 Helga and Noah in the bunker. And Helga was dragging bodies away and Noah was writing on the wall the dates.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, we can see that that's 1986 Helga, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's in 1986 at that point. He could be in any time period. We just don't know. And in this episode, we realise, based on the fact that two bodies turn up in the power plant area, that they were actually in 1953 at that point. Helga from 1986 has actually gone back to 1953 by the looks of it, and that's where they dumped the bodies. So yeah, that's essentially what you will be getting this in the episode, where it's not always clear immediately what year they're in, and that information will kind of be filled out later.
Yeah. Do you think when you were watching this, did you think could you predict where it was going? And were you right about your predictions?
I don't think anyone who watched this show ends up being right about where this show ends up.
Wow.
There's some points in this episode which, again, the information's always there in plain sight, but it doesn't necessarily strike you on first watch. You may, I mean, I'm not just talking about like watching it later on once you've figured it, once you've seen everything play out. I'm talking about getting to the end of this episode and then hitting restart and watching it again, and then just paying a little bit more attention to what's going on and the connotations of what, the conversations that are being had. Like, for example, the very opening line, there's text on the screen that says "Hell is empty and all the devils are here," a line from The Tempest by William Shakespeare. And then later on, they start talking about the Antichrist when they talk about the importance of the number 33, and they talk about how Christ died at 33, that the Antichrist, the age of the Antichrist was 33, and then just as they talk about the Antichrist in that, who should show up on screen? It immediately cuts to Noah standing outside a church, and it's like that's something that you. All right, it's fairly obvious, but you may miss it the first time around. You might not necessarily make that connection, and it's only on a rewatch you kind of go, "Oh, okay, I see what they did there." Whether that means anything or whether that's a red herring, that's to come. Yeah. But it's certainly those little moments where they kind of throw things in, and then on a rewatch, you kind of go, "Okay." And like the whole conversation with the clockmaker and the stranger talking about the. Not just the past affecting the future, but also the future affecting the past. And it plays out in this episode exactly what he's talking about. It shows us that everything that we've seen up till now, when we saw Helga already with his face covered in blood, Helga's face is already disfigured in 1986 and in 2019 rather, as an old man in the care home. And the things that he's saying then, when he's saying tick tock, one of the things that he did say when Ulrich went to visit him in the care home to try and find out more about what had happened way back in 86 with his brother, and Helga woke up in a start and he was really panicky about what was going on. He said something like, "It's him," and then said, I think he said something like, I can change the past and the future." Mm-hmm. And because of what he's been saying up to that point, we've all taken that to assume that he means he can change the past and the future. Like, he literally can change the past and the future. But then in this episode, we hear the same line uttered by Ulrich just before he strikes him. Mm-hmm. When he goes to start chasing him, and he says, he starts telling him about what he's going to do in the future. And by the way, that was really creepy when he said, what was it? When he's showing Ulrich the birds and he says, "Oh, they're beautiful when they're dead." Yeah. And I was like, yeah.
Straight away I got like a Damien, this kid is not quite there. There's something wrong with this child, and they say serial killers often start by killing animals, and when he said, "Yeah, it's beautiful when it's dead," and the scene following that, and we have Ulrich talking to what's his name, Helga.
Yeah.
So the scene when we have Ulrich talking to Helga, and he realizes, or he's pretty certain that he had something to do with him. He's to blame for the disappearance of Mikkel and his brother. And I didn't expect the show to go where it went. I thought he's gonna like hit him, but I didn't think we were gonna see it. And it was so graphic the way it did it. It was like, wow, this. This is it was such a.
It was shocking.
Yeah, it was shocking because it
was
didn't cut
just-
away, because you're used to this character Ulrich, who you think he's like the protagonist. He's, even though he's had an affair and stuff, you think, well, deep down he's a cop, he's a good guy. And it comes back to what I said at the beginning of this episode. If you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you? And that's where I think a lot of the show has come from, because. And I'll get my theory in now where I think this show is going. I think the actions that are happening like now are going to cause really bad shit to happen, and that has to be fixed in like the third season. And I think the scientist and the stranger, I think they are going to they will turn out to be the protagonists, or certainly the stranger will turn out to be the protagonist. And I think it's going to be a lot more. I think as I said earlier, you're gonna get the very clear bad guys and good guys in the show. Some will want the events to continue. Some will want the events to still happen. Some will still want these events to happen, and the others will be doing everything they can to stop these events from happening. That's my theory of the day. Simon's theory.
Tied into what we saw Helga go through. I mean, he went through a lot as a child. It's understandable now. We would kind of look at him and go, oh, he was a bit weird in 1986. But now that we actually see his childhood, we kind of feel for him again. Because
we got pissed on as well. We haven't even spoke about that.
Bullied. Yeah. Bullied by some random guys that stole his money. His mum didn't seem to be treating him very well. Bernd Doppler seemed to be treating him quite nicely in comparison. I don't know. He seemed to be a bit.
It seemed a bit creepy though.
Yeah, maybe, but he also seemed to feel like he was maybe a little bit protective of him and knew what the mum was like because of the way he kind of looked at her at times. So yeah, there was something. He didn't seem to have the best childhood growing up anyway. Had a lot to deal with. And then obviously having this really traumatic experience of a man basically calling you a murderer to be and then smashing you over the head with a rock, potentially then giving him some sort of, I guess, brain damage. Because
multiple times.
I mean, based on how he sort of speaks in 1986, you would assume that's basically the result of that. But I mean, that throws an interesting point, because based on what they've shown us so far with going through 1986, we could see the damage on his face then. Yeah. We saw it again in 2017. We saw him uttering words that Ulrich said to him now back in 1953. So what we've seen already must be the way it happened. And yet this episode ends with him dragging a lifeless body into the bunker and then waiting outside, like contemplating what he's done. So are we seeing something? Has he changed time, or is it just this the way it always played out? Is he? It implies, based on what we've seen on TV so far, that this is the way it always happened, based on the conversations that have been had. So either they're wrong, that that isn't the way time works, and that he has actually changed time, or what we're actually saying here is that he's still alive in the bunker.
But what we did see, though, we saw him in the previous episode covered in blood in the bright blue room, but the bunker that we saw that he was in didn't have the wallpaper. It was
dark.
Yeah.
And didn't have the wallpaper. So, yeah, again, I mean, this implies, again, that what we've seen in the past has happened. And now that we've seen who caused it to happen to him, so Ulrich's sitting outside the bunker, assuming that he's killed the boy, but the show's already shown us that doesn't seem to be the case. That in that bunker, he must still be alive.
Yeah, there feels like there's impending doom with this show now. The tone of it wasn't light to start with, but we feel like we're getting into the third act of a movie, but the third act of this season, which is going to set it up for what the hell ever happens next. Which I'm just wondering how what else this show can do without getting too lost lost without getting too lost in its exposition, and it's still asking you to understand an awful lot. And I have to tell you, when the scientist was talking to the stranger, I started to think, hang on, this is getting a bit Matrixy Revolution to me, where it's like the architect is talking and telling you how things work. And I'm glad it sort of slowed down on that, because it did get a little bit confusing.
The language can be a bit difficult to kind of process, really, in terms of what they're talking about. They are talking about some complex themes and ideas on time travel. Time travel is a complex beast, isn't it? There's a reason why we have so many different theories on what would happen with time travel, and this is exploring one of those ideas. But yeah, it takes a little bit of understanding, and I think they do a good job of demonstrating what they mean on screen while they're talking about this idea.
Well, I had one of the best montages, I thought, this episode.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think obviously this is a common approach to the show. They round about the 10-minute mark, 10 minutes from the end, they will drop in their montage. It will usually involve a number of characters, sometimes showing you them at different ages, and yeah, you just it kind of just reminds you where you are, where you're at, and where the other characters are at in their journeys as well, trying to sort of like keep track of everyone, because this episode introduces more characters, doesn't it? This is the thing. We've kind of settled on the previous characters that we've seen in previous episodes, and then in this episode we suddenly go, okay, well, Egon as an old man in 1986, but let's introduce him again as a younger man. And he's got a wife called Doris, so let's introduce her. Let's introduce Tronte's mum, because obviously we've met Tronte as an older man and as an adult journalist in 1986 as well. But now let's show him again as a younger boy, but then also introduce his mum into the mix, and what's her part to play in this. So they've kind of left it a little while, and now bang, here we go again. We've got new people to be introduced to. Daniel Carnwald, one of the policemen in the station. I think he's the chief of police in 1953, who is Innes Carnwald's father. So again, it's showing you the generation, as you would expect with a smaller town like this. There's a lot of generational kind of persistence for families through generations. So you're seeing that now. You're seeing we'll go back another generation and introduce you to their parents. So yeah, it's interesting. And on the same lines of Helga's abuse or potential abuse, so we also see that Tronte's upbringing doesn't seem to have been particularly great either. So he turns up with his mum, and she says that her husband's dead. I don't know. We don't know the history there, but certainly when you see Tronte roll his sleeve up and you see all these cigar burns on his arms, and you kind of think, oh my God, is that, who's caused that? Is that his mum? Is that his dad? Is that the reason the dad's now dead? Is he dead? Perhaps they've just run away. There's a whole bunch of questions around that. Is he likely to come back on the scene and start trying to, chase them down and cause problems for them in Wyndon? So yeah, there's a lot to think about in this episode, but it doesn't. You're right. I don't think it hugely progresses anything as such. All it's really doing is explaining a little bit about what we've seen so far around Helga and why he is the way he is.
Yeah, and I didn't think there were cigarette burns, or I didn't think there were cigar burns. I thought, is this something like to do with the nuclear power around there, or is this like a disease or something? I didn't get the vibe that it was like cigar burns. I think the best way to explain this episode that it doesn't progress the story much. It feels like it's pulling the elastic band back before it lets go.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, there is some major stuff that happens, obviously, with the Ulrich and the head bashing thing, which is gross. But, it does feel like how many episodes left? Two episodes.
We have 2 more episodes of this season, yeah.
Yeah, and then we're going to have a break for a few weeks, and then we'll go back to season 2. You're like, what? No, you need to watch you need to watch season 2, Simon, in one day.
Yeah, I mean, it's only 8 episodes, so we can definitely fit it in one day.
Gee, no, we can't. That'll be like a podcast that'll be 9 hours long.
Well, no, we'll still record separate podcasts. It's just we'll record them directly after each episode.
Oh, right. So, yeah, fine. I'll just won't leave the house. That sounds good.
It's 24 hours in a day. We've got nothing else to do at the moment with lockdown and everything coming back.
So do you think I'm sort of getting close with the good guys, bad guys thing that's going to be going on? Are we going to be finding out more of an antagonist? Are we going to be finding out more with other characters like the guy, the really rich kid who's like a drug dealer who we went to meet now, and we don't know what that conversation was yet. That feels like it's all being little things that are being set up for maybe next season. I don't think we're going to find that out in this season.
Yeah, there's obviously Noah seems to be the big player in all this. He seems to be the big manipulator on all of what's going on so far.
Is he?
Yes, he's the Antichrist. That's what they keep telling us. He's the Antichrist.
I think there's going to be a gotcha moment, and I'm not going to say what I think it is, but I'm going to write it down. I'm going to take a photograph of it, and I'm going to send it to you. But you can't open it until after I've seen the episode.
Okay. Okay. So the only thing, the other thing that I do wonder about is, I think towards the end of the episode, when Tannhaus and the stranger have obviously been having more than one conversation about this, and the conversation turns to sort of like, what if I told you that everything you wrote in your book is correct? This is exactly what's happening. There's a wormhole here. It's this whole place is wrong. We need to destroy the whole thing. We can destroy the wormhole by using this other device that you've already created. And obviously, this is the first that Tannhaus has kind of heard of this device. He kind of goes, what is this, and so on. Well, it's the thing that you created, and all that sort of stuff. And it's quite interesting that his reaction when the stranger says that my plan is to destroy the wormhole. He basically tells him to get out. Whatever it is that he said, he's like, seems to be really concerned by the idea that he wants to destroy this wormhole, which makes me wonder if he knows more than he's letting on at that point.
Yeah, it's almost as if he knows that the wormhole has to be used for the people to do the thing to stop the other thing from happening to the other thing. Basically, that's my theory.
Yeah, that's.
But no, he did. They did turn on him, didn't he? Was like, please leave. But the even bigger sort of reveal was that the machine that he showed him, he's got one identical to it.
Exactly. Which is and then I mean, so again, although he's been talking about how, I guess, I mean, does it mean that he didn't know what it was and he was waiting for the older stranger to tell him what it was that was in his possession? I don't know. It's certainly weird to now have two of these devices, to act like he didn't know what it was and then to end up with two of them. So he's obviously come across this thing before in some form. Does he built it? Did someone give it to him?
I think it's the same one. I think it's like a duplication of I think it's the same one.
It's the exact same one.
Yeah.
Rather than that he's built a separate one.
I think it's the exact same one that's being brought either back or forward or whatever. And that's, I just think it's the same one because it was identical apart from, but didn't look brand new. So I think that's the same one. We didn't see in this episode any of the kids really, did we? We didn't see Jonas. We didn't see Mikhail. We didn't see any of the 1986 stuff that was going on. Does it continue in 1953, or do we go back to 1986 before the end of this season? Surely you can tell me that.
I can tell you that we will be bouncing. There's more of the story in 1953 to tell. There's more of the story in 1986 to tell, and there's more of the story in 2019 to tell. Essentially, all of these things are happening. If you can imagine that they're all happening at the same time, so when we jump between the time periods, we're talking about like I forget what the latest date is in the show at this point, maybe like the 14th of November or something. It's the 14th of November in all three of those time periods. And when that means that when, for example, the door is opened in, the Sigmundus Creatus Est door in the cave, when that's opened, I think the same sounds are being heard in all three time periods at the same time. If that makes sense.
No.
Okay.
Say that again, because you've got me lost.
Imagine you have 3 lines on a piece of paper, 3 straight lines. The top line is 1953.
3 lines on a shirt.
3 lines, not lions.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought it was lions. I was like, what the heck? Okay, so 3 lines on a shirt.
3 straight lines on a piece of paper, and they are all perpendicular. That's not the right term. What's the term when they're alongside it? Parallel. 3 parallel lines.
Right, okay.
That are on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
The top line is 1953. The second line is 1986.
Yeah.
And the third timeline is 2019.
Can you just hang on, just slow down. I feel this will be more beneficial and better if you can do it in the voice of Doc Brown from Back to the Future, because I feel like that this is the sequence when he's drawing on the blackboard.
Yeah, I'm no good at accents, so I think I'll give that a miss.
Marty!
I'll tell you what to say. I'll send you a script, and you can. That was a pretty passable impression of Doc Brown.
Yeah,
definitely.
Right, so we got
3 lines.
So 3 lines on a piece of paper.
And so the top line is 1953, the second line is 1986, the bottom line is 2019.
Right.
If you mark a point on that line, like draw a straight line through all of those lines, so that it's just a straight line down, vertical. Yeah. Imagine that is the time to the hour and minute for all 3 periods at the exact same year. Right. In all 3 years.
Yeah.
So if somebody opens the door in 2019 and you start getting all that flickering stuff going on.
It's flickering in both decades.
Exactly. It's flickering in all 3 decades at the same time, I think, is basically what is happening. So that is, that potentially is why, when we were talking about the birds earlier, I don't think it's the nuclear power plant that's causing it. It's that the wormhole, the interacting when they open the doors and they travel. I think that is what's killing the birds, and that's why in 1953 we're seeing those dead birds. And I think there's 2 of them, isn't there? I don't know if maybe that just means the door's only open twice at that point. I'm lost. I need to go and watch it again.
How many times have you watched this episode?
It's this episode now probably about 6 times.
See, I've watched Lost. But when I've watched it, I've watched the whole thing. I've never gone back and watched particular episodes. It's like Lord of the Rings for me. I can't watch Lord of the Rings from the 2 Towers. I've got to start at the Fellowship and then get to the Return of the King, and it has to be the extended cuts, and I have to watch them all in the right order. And it's the same with Lost. I can't do a show and watch it not how it's supposed to be watched.
So the reason I think I'm watching this episode so many times now is because every time we watch an episode each week, what I end up doing is then watching the remaining episodes of the season, because I can't stop myself, because I'm so obsessed with it. So this is why I've ended up watching this episode so many times compared to the earlier parts of the season, because it's now got to a point where I'm so close to the end that if I start watching episode, and it happened with episode 7 as well. I got to the end of episode 7 and I was straight into episode 8, and then I got to the end of that straight into episode 9. So the more recent episodes, the ones that close out this season, I've seen them more than I've seen the earlier episodes.
So it's like a wave.
Yeah.
For the final episode, we should, because obviously we watched it separately. I should live stream my reaction as I'm watching the final episode. That's not a bad idea. I mean, it's got to be better than Cats. or like, you know, reaction. I don't mean like to the public. I mean to you. So like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, we'll watch it at the same time. And that way,
we should definitely agree to watch it at exactly the same time so that it's happening in parallel.
Yeah,
which is perfect given what we were just talking about earlier with the parallel timelines, and now we will both be watching it at exactly the same time. So whatever happens in your household will be happening in my household.
so we could do that. That's a good idea, and that'll be in 2 weeks' time for episode 10. So what do we have coming up next? What's the next episode?
Episode 9 is called Everything Is Now.
Not Everything Is Awesome.
No, Everything Is Now. Which ties into what we were just talking about, how everything is happening at the exact same time. It's all wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
It feels like that scene now in Spaceballs. When will then be now?
Go back to then.
When?
Now.
Now?
Now.
I can't.
Why?
We missed it.
When?
Just now.
When will then be now? Soon.
Rick Moranis. Whatever happened to Rick Moranis? I mean, he didn't have the biggest career either, but what he did do, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And did you know who was originally down to do to play his role in Ghostbusters? John Candy.
Ooh. I can't imagine John Candy in that role.
No, it would have been completely different because, you know, John Candy does that bumbling, lovable, you know, like you feel sorry for him type like character, but not nerdy. But you could imagine John Candy doing it. But yeah, Rick Moranis, man, he was just so good. So episode 9, Everything Is Now. That does mirror what you were just talking about. And which makes me think, I wonder if this is going to be set in all 3 timelines. Are we going to see multiple things going on? Are we going to see more stuff about Noah? I'd like to know more about this evil guy. I mean, he's not done anything wrong yet. All we've seen is he's got a bit of a dodgy tattoo. He dresses up as a priest and he doesn't mind drug dealers. But apart from that, we don't know. Oh, and he doesn't age either.
Yeah, I think it's... I guess if you've got the stranger who appears to be the good guy in all of this and wants things to be reset and fixed, and then you've got Noah, who at the moment appears to be manipulating things, and it seems to be involved in all the what we would consider to be bad stuff happening, given that there are dead bodies being dragged around and stuff. So it's interesting that we're kind of picturing this as being bad versus good, and yet the main takeaway from this, the conversation, is that everyone thinks about stuff as dualities, and that's not the case. You have bad and good, but then you also have the neutral in the middle. So does that mean that there's a third person to come in this that is the neutral character? Or is one of these two the neutral character and there's someone that's more evil or better? You know, there's I think this show is basically going to explore the idea of freeze a lot more now that they've just sort of said that. So given, I think that's kind of immediately apparent in the fact that this is a 3-season show.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the only, and I don't think that's going to be the only example of freeze in this show. I bet that'll be another thing that when we get to the end of it, you can go and rewatch and identify a lot more freeze.
Yeah, I think the stranger, I think I said this earlier, is Jonas. You don't have to confirm that because I know you won't. But I think Jonas is going to be the main good dude on this show. And I also, the question I've got, you won't answer it, is do we ever find out the stranger's real name? So there we have it. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of CineBinge. I hope you enjoyed it. My name's Simon.
And I've been the stranger.
See you next week. Boom. Done.